Indigenous people are proud of our culture, spirituality, and traditions. We are the caretakers of our land, our home, our Mother Earth, and the animals who reside here. Education. The one thing all adults can agree on. All children deserve a proper education. And yet, an entire group is left behind. I grew up on the Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone Reservation over in McDermott, Nevada, and I attended the combined school there.
I think that specifically thinking about Native education and Native teachings from within the community, I mean, it shapes the way that you see yourself and identify yourself in the world. Because lots of communities have been, or have been through the process of assimilation, right? Like we're constantly struggling, right, and trying to figure it out. How do we learn in this Western world? What are the things that we should prioritize and what are the things that we should not prioritize in terms of education? So, I think that, I got to a point where I have to grapple with the contradictions and then also understand that there's different ways of knowing and different ways of, understanding what knowledge and what wisdom is and also what education is, right? I think that we have been through a lot, right? In history, and we are still going through a lot, but we need to understand that there's other ways of existing, other ways of being. And education, right, within Native communities is very specific and it's centered around land, it's centered around, relationships that we build not only with people, but with more than human. And I think throughout my education, I had to relearn and deconstruct a lot of things that to me were impossible.
Their culture needs to be embedded into their education. Because I feel like if they are more grounded in their culture, they're more apt to make that connection, with the public education, as long as they have a good base with their culture. I just feel like that's really important. I mean, I've seen it, in other communities where they're bringing back, their own food stuff, their own foods, their own cultures, singing and speaking their own language. I think that's really important. I think I see a difference in the kids that have been taking these Paiute classes that they had. They seem more confident. They're speaking it more, in school, and they're not ashamed. And I feel like for so long, I feel like our Native American students have been made to feel ashamed of their culture, their language, because they were told not to speak it. But now that they're getting confident and they know that it's okay, I mean, I feel like they're just being more open. You could see it with the kids that we have here. So I would say their culture and their language.
Relationships that we build not only with people, but with more than human. And I think throughout my education, I had to relearn and deconstruct a lot of things that to me were impossible. For example, one of the things that I can say is I had to go through a whole PhD master's to learn the fact that many communities have relationships with more than humans. And that because of things that had happened in the world, in history, like occupation, settler colonialism, lots of communities have been displaced, but also detached from traditional ways of doing things, so traditional education. And I had to do all of my studies to learn that, right? And then going back to community, I think that is very clear that the work that I do in terms of education, it is to deconstruct that and then to go back to what a lot of Indigenous Native communities, traditionally will do, to learn from the land, to have an education that is based on the land.
I grew up very privileged to have my mom. She has always been one to implement the importance of education, always saying that it's how you're going to be able to get it in life, how you're going to be able to grow and make enough money to have a good living. And I believe the first time she ever mentioned it, or that I can really remember, was in first grade. We were coming home from a Winnemucca trip, and I remember her telling me that. And it really stuck, you know, because she is such an amazing woman. Those life lessons stayed with me and are still with me today.
I will say that education provides one of the most valuable things that I think is the way that we can think critical, the way that we can, right, learn and then use our critical thinking to, ask questions and to, push further into, why are we thinking this way? Sometimes, right, that doesn't really happen, but I think that that's one of the most valuable things. Like when you go to college, that's what, a lot of students gain, right? That ability to critically think the world and to question everything. And if you want to push even further, right, like even if you are in specific fields like Native studies, for example, to think about how we can deconstruct all of these ways of thinking that have been imposed. So education really gives you that tool. And that tool is very powerful when we know how to apply that, because then we get this critical lens and then you're thinking through whatever happens in your daily life, or even if you are in classes, right, like you're using this critical lens to question things and not just accept everything that comes to you, right? Because I think that education is also that, the tool to grow as an individual with, your own personal way of thinking that is critical and questions things and not just accepts all of the things that come your way. So the critical thinking is I think, one of the most important components that education gives a lot of students. That ability to question, to, ask and just, deconstruct everything that is given to you, so that you're not just accepting and saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna do that. Like, actually, why do I have to do that? And in what other ways can I do that? So I think critical thinking.
By the time I hit 5th grade, I had a cousin who just moved back from Las Vegas. He was going through his multiplication tables very fast. Those little practices where you have to read off and everything. And I was curious. I wanted to know how he was going so fast, how he's going so quick and so efficiently. And I asked him, like, how are you doing this so well? And he said, oh, this? I learned it in like 3rd grade. As if those words didn't just crumble my entire world. And my teacher added in. He said, yeah, some kids learn by 2nd grade. And I don't know what they were talking about after. All I could feel was my heart pounding out of my chest. Because it registered to me that I was 2 years behind in math, in reading, in pretty much every subject, because I saw how he operated. And I don't know what happened after that. I was still in a really big depression that came with 2020. And by the end of my 6th grade year, all I really knew is I had to get out.
Because I feel like our school district is not hiring actual grade level teachers, because we're a rural school. We don't have the numbers. Well, they tell us we don't have enough students to warrant a teacher for 5th grade or 4th grade. So they have one teacher teaching 4th and 5th, one teacher, for 2nd and 3rd. They have one teacher doing kindergarten 1st. And so it's hard to expect kids to be on grade level when you have them mixed with students that are a year or 2 years younger. And I think that this district isn't doing enough to hire certified teachers, even at the secondary level. Our current situation is we don't have a math teacher, we don't have a science teacher, we don't have an English teacher. And those are 3 core subjects where I feel like they need to be doing more to try to get our students these certified staff to teach them what they need before we send them out into the world.
I asked my mom, I can't stay here. I need to get out. And she asked my auntie. And so I moved to Elko with her. I spent that 7th grade year really catching up. staying with my auntie and being so far away. I was 4 hours away from home. And so it took a really big emotional toll, I'll say, but not as much as the fact that I would have been so far behind in my education and I probably wouldn't have had a chance to catch up, period. And there was this one time, or no, it was math. I was struggling so hardcore. I remember having my mom call me in the middle of the day saying, "You're going to have to take an extra class. You're going to have to kick off one of your electives because you are so far behind in math." I was going to fail, essentially, is what they were telling me. And I don't know what happened, but it triggered something. Like I've always been somewhat stubborn. And so hearing that I was going to have to take off a class that I genuinely loved to have to catch up in something that I should not have been behind in the first place. I spent the next month or two staying after school until 5 o'clock because my teacher had to go pick up her daughter from her classes afterwards. I stayed those 2 hours every single day, every chance that I got, studying with her, talking with her, hoping that I could catch up. I didn't really know what I was doing. All I knew is that I had to fix it before something went wrong, before I failed. And after I heard that, I genuinely thought that I was a failure too. I was a disappointment to my family, to my friends, and to my people. And the day that I finally realized that I had finally caught up, I was crying after school. I had called my mom and she told me, "You did it." It was beyond.
Students have to assimilate, right? Like they have to figure it out a way to fit into this little box. And how to be a student, it is challenging, right? If you're coming from a Native community where you are part of this community and there's other different ways of teaching you. And by that, I mean, like you learn from your family, you learn from your elders, you learn from nature, you learn from different places. Classroom is not just this little space. And then when you enter, education in the Western world, the first challenge is that, like, how do you become a student when you have learned how to be a student in different contexts? So it is challenging because, right, like you come into this new way and you need to figure it out right away. Like how do you become a student in this Western world? And right, like sometimes, students fail just because it's about assimilating, and then it's this contradiction or clash of ways of thinking, ways of being, and it's difficult, right? So a lot of Native students, right, struggle with that. And then there's also the discouraging from the teachers, probably also on that side of, like you're not good enough, or your grades are not good enough, or, you have to take tests in a specific way. You have to know certain knowledge, and if you don't know it by a certain age, then you're failing, right? Like that is also that the standards of, becoming a student in the Western world. And really, Native students need to learn how to be students in a different context, and that's one of the challenges. And as a result, right, like lots of students that get discouraged and drop out because, right, like you have that, it's college or high school or school is not for me. And the idea that it's not that school is not for you, it's that school is not built for Native students, and it's not, the structure or the way that it's organized is not built for other students, but the traditional Western student, right, or the Anglo traditional student in the U.S.